many Muslims involved, although I've very much been trying to get more and more Muslims involved in our community. So you're 100% welcome. If you don't mind, like, letting us know more about yourself, like what your journey's been like, why you're doing this, what do you do other than this, that type of stuff.
Right. So I'm on Speaker's Corner every week.
So you're a da'i.
Yeah, you could, but okay. So I'll tell you the angle that I come at, right? Because this is from my. So okay, what's special about Ahmadi Muslims? We're the only people with a Khalifa, which is this is the way Muslims are supposed to be led. And it's part of a prophecy, and we consider ourselves in the latter days. I don't want to get too theological, but we're the only people with a Khalifa, and that's part of a prophecy of Prophet Muhammad that Islam would break up into many sects and it'll go in the wrong direction, except for one group, which would be the united community, and there'll be a Khalifa. And so we're the only people who fulfill that prophecy.
So the Ahmadiyya, well, I want to go back to actually your story, but just to clarify, so I thought that the Ahmadiyya doesn't have a direct relationship, as in a chain from Muhammad to I hope I'm not being disrespectful, but the Khalif, I guess the Khalif Ahmad, like who that you're identified with. Well, I'm not sure exactly how to address him.
Okay, so I'll just explain. Maybe it'll clarify something. Yeah. So we are the followers of the second coming of Jesus, right?
Okay.
But it's a metaphorical second coming of Jesus, just like Jesus taught himself. When he was asked about before he was supposed to come, he was a Messiah, right? And the Jews asked him, "Where is Elijah? The second coming of Elijah is supposed to come before you." And he said, "That's John the Baptist." So he believes in a metaphorical second coming. Jesus believed in second coming, metaphorical second coming. We believe in a metaphorical second coming. There's never ever been a physical second coming of any prophet in Judaism. I mean, in Christianity, whatever you want to call it. That's right. So he is the metaphorical second coming of Jesus, right?
And so you refer to him as Mirza Ahmad, or
yeah, sure, Mirza Ahmad. Yeah, you can use whichever part of the name you want.
Oh, okay. I mean, I didn't know how to address him.
That's fine.
So Mirza Ahmad is fine.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. So he lived from 1835 to 1908.
Yeah.
Now, so you believe that he was, as you said, a metaphorical second coming of Jesus, but he wasn't. There wasn't a Khalif. There wasn't like somebody who, from the time of Muhammad, continued the teachings of Muhammad between Muhammad and Mirza Ahmad.
So I'm maybe trying to understand what you're saying. So there's been Islam since Prophet Muhammad. There's that unbroken chain. And also Prophet Muhammad said that there'll be people called Mujaddid, which means kind of reformers at the head of every century. So you've had that as well, right? And so Mirza Ahmad was actually, before he said, "I'm the promised Messiah," or the second coming of Jesus, he was actually told or pronounced amongst Muslims as the reformer of that century.
Okay.
So he was actually well known and well respected. So if that explains anything, I don't know, but yeah.
I just meant in terms of historical succession, because, for example, the Shia, they have a concept of, okay, the next caliph after Muhammad should have been Ali. Yeah. Whereas many Sunnis say it was, in fact, I think almost all Sunnis say it was Abu Bakr.
Yeah.
And then the fourth caliph was Ali. But then there have been successions of teachers but
so the succession
Mirza
is not
Ahmad,
necessary. No, it's not necessary. In fact,
that's what I was wondering.
Yeah,
okay.
so there's actually part of the prophecy that one of the prophecies that's kind of relating to or alluding to is that Prophet Muhammad said shortly after his demise, the true caliphate would quickly disappear and it would turn into kingships, then dictatorships, and it would basically become less and less spiritual. And then when that finished, and it finished with the Ottoman Empire, which had effectively rulers which were not spiritual at all, but they still call themselves caliphates. When that finished, when that, I'm just kind of, the dates are slightly here and there, but let me say, the promised Messiah, Mirza Ahmad, he came, and the moment the Ottoman Caliphate ended, the new caliphate that continued after Mirza Ahmad started. So we fulfilled that prophecy that was supposed to happen. And you're supposed to only have Khalifas or caliphates after a prophet. You're not really supposed to just start it of your own accord.
I see. Okay. And so Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, he after he passed away, who became the next caliph?
So you got Nuruddin, and then you got different people.
Was that, so that wasn't hereditary? That was one of his students who became the next caliph?
It can be, it doesn't have to be hereditary at all. It's just whoever's the right person. So now what you have is you have the Khalifa chooses people from around the world before he dies, before he dies. It's an electoral college, similar to what I think the Pope has, right?
Okay.
And then as soon as a Khalifa dies, then they are all called to the center, which happens to be in London at the moment, and they elect a new Khalifa within a few days.
And what are these people called? They're called imams, or what?
They are generally have just reasonably spiritual people, so they don't necessarily have to be imams. They tend to be either imams or just to explain it a little bit, we're the most organized Muslim community in the world, which means we have a massive hierarchy. Like I'm in a local, just in my few streets, I know all the Ahmadi Muslims. And we have meetings, we have organizations, I've got positions, like all those things. So
yeah, that's what I'm really interested about. I'm wondering how exactly the
you don't have that.
functions.
Yeah, you don't have that in the rest of the Muslim world, basically.
Okay, so there is a hierarchy, and there are ranks of teachers, I guess.
Teachers, or you can call them administrators, because they have different jobs, right? Your job is to be in charge and allocate all the duties, to collect money and things like that, do the teaching, to do the just outreach, and all sorts of things.
Are there titles that go along with these positions?
Yeah, there are so many. It's like basically there's lots of just departments, just endless departments.
So what would be the equivalent of a local pastor, like a church has a pastor or a community has a rabbi? In an Ahmadiyya community, what would be the equivalent title for somebody who has?
So just to give you an idea, there are so many levels. So there's so just in my few streets, the person in charge will be called the local president. That's all, right?
Okay.
And then he will have his committee, which I'm part of. My local duty is basically teaching religious knowledge. Right, and so I just have to, and we do little reports, how much I've done.
Is there a title for your position?
It's an Arabic term, Talim, maybe similar.
Talim,
Taleem. Talim. I think there might. Is there something equivalent in Hebrew, because it's almost a sister language to Arabic. Talim. Yeah.
I'm trying to think that root. I'm not sure.
Anyway, so there's so many different roles. Also, like
is it ta'alim as in ulama?
It sounds similar. Ulama means the teachers, or
Right.
so
Yeah.
it's related.
So
Yeah.
if it's related to ulama, then yeah, there is a Hebrew equivalent. So I mean, the funny thing is we have a term in Hebrew that's Talmid, which means student actually.
Right.
But yeah, so that might be some sort of equivalent thing. So you're okay, so that's your position, and then
I have to report up to the regional position, to the national position, to the sort of, and it goes all the way up to the Khalifa, who's always talking to all the different countries all the time.
I see.
Yeah,
and who's the current Khalif?
Khalifa
is the current.
Yeah, okay. That's Khalifa. So there's Khalifa, which is the Arabic version, or Caliph, which is the anglicized version. Yeah.
Okay, so Khalifa is the
so if you search on Google fifth Khalifa, this really annoys the rest of the Muslims. You get our current Khalifa.
What's his name?
Mirza Masroor Ahmed.
Okay, Mirza Masroor Ahmed. Yeah. And is he descended from Mirza Ghulam Ahmed?
Okay. Yes, he is, but it's not a necessity at all.
It's not a necessity, but
it's happened.
So how many Khalifas have there been since Mirza Ghulam Ahmed?
So we're on the 5th Khalifa at the moment.
Okay, and have all of them been descendants of Mirza Ghulam Ahmed, or no?
All but the first.
All but the first. Okay, so the first one wasn't, and then the other ones have been.
Yeah,
I see. Very interesting.
And some people take exception and go, "Oh no, it's just a family business as well." Everybody can make any claim they want.
Well, I mean, I belong. The synagogues I go to are Hasidic, and Hasidic dynasties are a thing. So I have no problem with dynasties myself. Well, not much of a problem with dynasties, but when sometimes it makes sense. A lot of times it makes sense. But but would you say the major reason that a lot of Muslims would say you're not Muslim is because of this idea that Mirza Ghulam Ahmed was the second coming of
So the funny thing, this is the really funny thing, right? All the Muslims are waiting for a second coming. But when it comes, people get upset. And that's what happens with Judaism, right? With Jesus. Like Jesus said, I'm the Messiah, you're waiting for me, but I'm not the kind of Messiah you expected. I'm not going to be a ruler, I'm not going to give you loads of money. Yeah, right. In fact, I'm going to tell you to be humble instead and offer the other cheek, which is what they needed at the time. Right. So it's annoying. So it's just annoying. And it's just if you go into if I go through any debate, it's ridiculous what they're saying. The reason why we're persecuted and killed is just because cool.
This is somebody from your channel. I don't know this person.
Yeah. So this guy agreed that one of the reasons we're the nicest and most polite Muslims around the world.
I've noticed
we're famous for it.
I've noticed what Sean Hannity has Ahmadiyya Muslims on a lot. That I don't watch him, but every time he has a Muslim, he's constantly talking about how he loves the Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
All right, I never knew that he actually mentions that we are Ahmadi Muslims, but I know that we're very organized. We have, media spokespeople and all sorts of things within our organization. So yeah.
So that's really interesting. If you don't mind me asking personal questions.
I didn't get upset. We're very open. Go for it.
So were you born in the United Kingdom, or were
born in the UK, yeah.
You were born in the UK, and may I ask, how old are you?
42.
Oh, you're my age. I'm 45.
Cool.
So what was your journey? Your family was also Ahmadiyya, or you grew up in it?
Couple of generations. So let me see. My great grandfather converted, I believe.
Okay.
And yeah, so there's always interesting stories behind all the different conversions. He walked from I think from the north to the south of India, but barefoot until his feet were bleeding, just to meet the promised Messiah, and converted. Yeah.
Wow. So if somebody who is a Muslim but not part of the Ahmadiyya community were to want to join the Ahmadiyya community, is there some sort of initiation rite? Is there or they're considered Muslim already part because they're Muslim, or is it different?
Yeah, so you basically just have to accept that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad is the promised Messiah, the second coming of Jesus. And we've got a document, the 10 steps or 10 things you have to agree on. There's nothing something you can be policed on, but these are beliefs. And
what are those 10 steps?
They're essentially just don't be adulterous, tell the truth, but you have to accept Mirza Ghulam Ahmad as the promised Messiah, the second coming of Jesus. We say promised Messiah as a short version, so if you Google promised Messiah, you find Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. And they're basically, these are not additions to the basic creed, which is there's no God but Allah and Prophet Muhammad is his messenger, just a clarification, or just like, what does that entail? If you just say there's no God, then you have to follow whatever God prophesied and said would happen. Therefore, you have to accept from the Mirza Ghulam Ahmad as, in fulfillment of all those prophecies. So there's.
So what? If you don't mind, like going through the 10, I would be really interested in knowing what they are.
I have to say, I've got 2 minutes before I have to break my fast.
If you have to go,
because we break. I fast Mondays and Thursdays, which I think is a Jewish tradition as well.
Yes, Mondays and Thursdays. Yes.
Yeah. Let me just quickly go to conditions of Bayat, if I can quickly find it. I'll go through some of them if I can.
You can also share your screen if you like. There's a
there's a thing cool. That that'll make it easier.
Present. Yeah, you can click on present and then share the
screen.
And there should be. There you go.
Cool. Okay, so let me see. Let me try to get. There's a whole book on this. So it's called the Bayat, which means like essentially to sell yourself, like your soul, to, which is basically in line with Islam. Islam means to give up submit your will to God.
Taslim,
yeah. So let's see. Here we go. Let's whiz through some. That till the last day of his life, so these are the things you accept to do. Till the last day of your life, you should abstain from shirk, which is associating partners with God. That you should keep away from falsehood, cruelty, adultery, dishonesty, disorder, rebellion, and every kind of evil. That you should offer your 5 daily prayers, or the salah.
So that's one of the 5 pillars of Sunni Islam in general. Number 3.
Yeah, there's no difference. If you're a true Muslim, you'd be doing all of these things anyway. That he should not inflict injury on any of God's creatures. That he should not bear any. That he will bear every hardship for the sake of Allah, that is God. That he shall not follow vulgar customs and guard against evil inclinations. That he shall discard pride and haughtiness, live in humility and meekness. That he shall make it bigger just for the viewers. That he shall hold his faith, dignity, and the welfare of Islam dearer to them than his own life, wealth, and children. That he shall have sympathy for all of God's creatures and devote his talents to their welfare. That he shall establish this brotherhood with Ahmed, or you normally say the name of the Khalifa who's at the time, obeying me in all good things, and firmly adhere to these rules until the last breath of your life. And maybe you can see, just to, I should have broken my fast, but I'll just
I'll let you can go and come back when you have time. My thing is here for a while. I'm going to be, and there's a Bible study later, which we would love to have you on. It might not make with your time, but you're very welcome. I mean, it's been fascinating.
I suppose what I'll do, I'll just say this one thing that might be evident from these 10 steps, and which is why we're the follow the second coming of Jesus. What the metaphor means is that we're famous for a phrase or motto: love for all and hatred for none. And so if I talk to any other Muslim in Speaker's Corner, and I just say, you know, we should be kind to everybody and love everybody, says, you must be an Ahmadi Muslim. That's the extent to which we're seen as the most loving kind of Muslims, and I'll end with that.
Okay. Have an easy well, you're breaking your fast, and Eid Mubarak.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me on your show. Appreciate it.
You're always welcome. You're always welcome.
All right.
Eid Mubarak.
Thank you. Eid Mubarak.
I joined at just the right moment, so you weren't alone. You see? One person for another. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
And I have to say, I'm going to disturb somebody. There we go.
What's his name?
She's Esme.
Esme.
Short for Esmeralda.
I see.
Yeah, she's going to be looks at me with disgust now for having moved her.
Yeah, Shadow. I'm not sure where exactly. I'm not sure where exactly. There's a few places. Yep, there's a few places she likes to hang out. So like 1, 2, 3, and then sometimes she goes over there 4.
Yeah, I have a chair next to me, and the cat likes to sit on it.
Aha, I see.
So because she would sit on my knee, but you know, it's like with a desk, it's just not quite enough room to put a cat on there.
How have you been? It's been a while.
It's been a month or two. So yeah, I'm trying to remember when I last came on. I went to the gym for the first time in 3 months today.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. It was a bit of a mikvah, as they say, but it was interesting that I.
Hold on. Did you say mikvah or mitzvah?
Mitzvah.
Mitzvah. Okay.
Get my tongue together.
Okay. Because both would have worked. Mikvah is actually baptism.
And that would be. It was a bit of a baptism of fire back into it again. I had shingles, and in January, and it completely knocked me out. I had 3 weeks off work.
Yeah.
And then I've taken time to get back again.
Yeah. Well, now you don't need it, but the shingles vaccine for is.
They issue it to 75 pluses here for free.
Yeah.
I'm also from the same place he is. So interestingly.
Oh yeah, we have lots.
The wrong side of the pond.
We have lots of people from the old country. That
it's because you're in the evening slot here, so it's now 8 o'clock, 8:15 in the evening. So it's a perfect time for us to come on and chat to people. And
yeah. I usually don't do this early, although hopefully. So the problem we're having is that once you hit 15 admin slots on StreamYard, they want $4,000 a year for any additional slots, and it's like not going to shell that out. We're trying to figure out a way of having multiple accounts so that we can have more administrative slots, but we're also kind of playing a bit of a musical chairs with the admins. But I would love to see eventually, hopefully, Randos United would have 24/7 just chatting streams.
That would be sensible. Yeah, just join in and leave again. I mean, it works quite well. I mean, on the Discord, it worked quite well for a while. And then people sort of drifted off and had their own conversations. They didn't want others to, it became those who wanted to were in there. Yeah.
Yeah, what's $4,000, Lance?
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, as a single man, you got nothing to spend the money on except really,
Honestly, I already sink a lot of time and money into this little corner, but yeah.
So yeah. I'd like to self-declare at this point, having had 3, all of whom I've managed to dispose of into the wide world in some reasonable fashion.
I'm glad to hear it. I think 3 is almost an acceptable.
Thank you. So the advantage of there's. Going back to that discussion, it was really interesting, by the way, and I wanted to join earlier, and I was watching it earlier, as you could see, but I'm still having my tea, as I call it.
That's very funny that for an American, for you to say, I'm having my tea, and then show a bowl of food.
That's right.
I had my tea.
Yeah, well, I've got my coffee now, so I have got that as well. So it's definitely pudding time.
But tea is a meal in the UK, and it's not here. Yes.
No, because I had my main meal midday. But going back to that family thing, it's really interesting because big families are bad news. They are bad news.
What do you mean?
It's not like I'm not a believer, and I understand that the children are a blessing from the Lord, and you want your 5 because that's your full quiver full and all this sort of stuff. But actually, firstly, the more you educate women, the fewer children they have, statistically.
Well, it depends what kind of education. Part of the problem is our education has deliberately been educating women to have fewer children.
You could say that. Yeah. But secondly, the reason that you have many children is it's interesting that they were talking about community and supporting each other and everything else, is that they've become a pension policy.
I think children are the best pension policy, and that's part of the reason why I think you should at least have 5 Well, I would honestly, like, my rabbi, his wife is 2 years younger than me. She just gave birth to their 10th, and they had their first grandson.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I come from that sort of a complex but multi-wife family. That's so on both sides. It divorces and messes,
yeah, that's
and that also brings multiple challenges to it.
Yeah, that's very different. Funny enough, 2 of my great-grandfathers had multiple wives at the same time, because that was actually a thing in Iran. Yeah.
Yep.
So, and I got to meet, we called her Grandma Miriam. She was the sister wife to my great-grandfather, who I'm named after, Mirza Yaqub. Yeah. And they liked each other. My grandmother, Passand, and Grandma Miriam liked each other more than they liked my great-grandfather.
I bet that made for a very happy home for him.
Yeah, when my great-grandmother died, Grandma Miriam was kind of done with my great-grandfather and left the country. So he ended up, she was his 4th wife. He had 2 wives at the same time, but she was his 4th wife, and he ended up living alone at the, well, he had many kids and grandkids who took care of him, but he ended up, his wife was living in Chicago when he died. So yeah.
It's, I want to finish the children thing, but I'm going to divert. I'm terrible divert.
Me too. Have you noticed?
No, I never spotted that. No. I was at university once upon a time, long ago and far away, and I met a very nice Israeli guy who was doing a PhD, and I was also doing my last year at uni, and we became fast friends. And his name was Sassoon, so his family name was Sassoon.
Oh, Oh,
that's
different.
Yeah. And of course, they left in 56. They left in 56.
So, for the people who don't know, the Sassoon family is an extremely wealthy Syrian
Iraq. So these were Iraqi ones.
Oh, they were Iraqi Sassoons.
And in 1948,
so the Iraqi Sassoon family, I mean, if they're the famous Sassoon family,
they're not the famous.
We're not known for being incredibly wealthy. They were actually known for being incredibly well learned and scholars. Sassoon is a very popular and well-known name in Sephardic circles.
So they left Iraq in 48, went to Iran thinking it'd be nice and safe.
I had family who did that as well. Being from the Kurdish area, some of my family lived on the Iraqi side, and a lot of people. 48. So in Tehran, there was the Iraqi synagogue that was all the people who had come from Iraq, and they actually they kind of had their own community, but so that was a thing that happened, and some of my family moved and then later ended up immigrating to Israel. So
and I went and saw him in Israel after he'd graduated. And,
interesting.
Then he went and worked for some project inside the military state apparatus, and we had to cut contact.
Before I forget, are you coming to the conference we're having next February? You can't?
I can't make anything like that, no.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to make it. The saddest for me was that when Paul came to England, I left England the same day as he arrived, and came back the day he left, because I always have my holidays at that point, because of the way my year works. So yeah, it was a great sadness to me.
So we're having we're going to
families.
We're going to have a conference in Jerusalem in next February, hopefully, if Chazi gets his act together, and we might have one of my candidates. I'm joking, but one of my candidates for the Messiah, Chazi's father, show up. I'm only joking. What?
Which Messiah?
Well, unfortunately, he can't be the Messiah because he's a Levy, and
yes.
Unfortunately, unfortunately, he can't be the Messiah, but pretty close to it, because apparently he's Jordan Peterson, Paul VanderClay, Jonathan Pageau, and John Vervaeke rolled all into one, except he's Jewish.
I thought it was Burn Powers.
Burn Powers isn't Jewish.
That's true.
And he hasn't spent the last 40 years writing books and publishing and being a professor of psychology about the importance of religious life and art in the importance of religion and art in psychology and society. Like his father. Wow. So Chazi eventually is going to come on, and I'm going to get to yell at him in public, but I've been yelling at him for days now, because what he's been hiding from us is Chazi is interested in this little corner, not because of anything he learns here, but because he's like, oh, this is all the stuff my dad's been saying ever since I was a kid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Chazi decided not to mention that to everyone for some reason I can't fathom.
I can understand that. I can see that, if you had that sort of background, and actually this was nothing new to you, because you had someone. What would then happen is if you came in and said, oh yeah, Dad does all this all the time, then everyone's going to say, where's your dad? Bring him in.
Right.
Why is he not talking to Paul VanderClay every week?
I agree, but what's wrong with that? If Paul VanderClay wanted to talk to my dad every week, I wouldn't mind.
I think if you're quite shy, or a little bit shy even, or you actually want to be your own person, maybe, then it might be a little
okay,
awkward.
So that was my guess, and that's why I was like, Khezi, can we get your dad to like maybe talk to John Vervaeke or Paul VanderClay? And Khezi got very, very quiet. And I'll let him explain.
Right.
I've been spending the last 3 or 4 days needling Khezi over this, because how I would have handled things is quite different from how Khezi has handled things. And the thing is, like, I could actually go over Khezi's head, because his father like has his email all over the place, and
yeah, he's a public figure, isn't he? In that sense.
Yeah, like he's a university professor. He's a prominent university professor in Israel. He teaches at Bar Ilan University, which is the equivalent. It's the Israeli equivalent of Yeshiva University. It's where the modern Orthodox in Israel go to university. And so
sounds like the Texas Theological Cemetery.
Cemetery? Did I
say cemetery? I went to Bible college here. We were very rude about Americans.
Well, in the yeshiva world, we were very rude about the standardized college rabbinic system that exists in modern Orthodoxy, because you apply to go to, it's called REITs, Rabbi Yitzchak Elochanan Theological Seminary at Yeshiva University, and you take your courses, and after I think 5 years, you have your Masters of Hebrew Letters, I guess they call it, and they call you a rabbi, right? And then you study 3 more years, and I think that's what they require, but it's like very, very, it's very
academic,
set on, yeah. And in the Haredi, so just to translate the term Haredi, please don't use the term ultra Orthodox, but that's the other term that's used for the Haredi community, is in the Haredi community, that's not how being a rabbi works at all. Well, you go to a rabbi who can ordain you, and when he feels you're competent, he will ordain you. And oftentimes it's a formality you undergo because you are working in a situation where rabbinic ordination is considered part of the job, and you go to a rabbi who's respected, and he tests you to make sure that you have the requisite knowledge, and he ordains you. But it's very much, okay, a rabbinic position opens up, and the person who is best qualified for that position is that person
to it.
That person gets ordained, right? But in modern Orthodoxy, like, people just go and get the degree, you know.
I have to say that what's happened is that we have infected you.
Yes, I know. Yeah. Yes, I have very much noticed that.
In the Tom Holland sense.
Yeah.
You're swimming in a Christian sea.
Yeah. And actually that's happening in Islam as well. That's the funny part.
That's our friend Khalid. It's interesting. He grew up in the UK, and he's an Ahmadiyya, which is already sort of, I'm sorry, Khalid, to say this to you, but it's a reaction to the arrival of Christians into India, that you get the things like the Ahmadiyya. And in fact, what you also get is Hinduism doesn't exist. Well, it's interesting what Tom Holland was saying about, you know, if you'd asked an Indian what religion he was in 1500 before a single European turned up, or 1400,
he would have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he might have known I'm a Muslim, and he might have known I'm not a Muslim, but that would be probably the nearest thing you could get to it.
So it's interesting, you know, with the whole Noahide movement, part of the question has become, what do Noahides call themselves? Yeah. And Chazi pointed out in the Talmud, I was not aware of this, but in the Talmud, there is a discussion where it says anybody who denies idolatry, including Gentiles, is called a Jew, like a Yehudi. Yeah, that's that. I was surprised. I was surprised at that.
So we sing a little song called "Father Abraham Has Many Sons."
Yeah,
for children. But yes,
yeah. And in a very real sense, this is actually something that I've been talking to Christians more and more about. Within Judaism, our Orthodox Judaism, our belief has been that Abraham was the first, like his nation is a spiritual nation, which encompasses all of humanity. So when somebody converts to Judaism, since their father's name is no longer used, or oftentimes they don't have a Hebrew name anyway for their father, they get called Ben Abraham, right? Abraham. So yeah, the son of Abraham, because we believe that all we believe that all converts are in fact children of Abraham, and Ishmael and Moab, or you know, Edom, those are not part of the 70 nations. When you look at the table of the 70 nations in Genesis, and within Judaism, there's this idea that so we say that we are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Abraham is basically everybody. Isaac, his best known son, Ishmael, and there are other sons as well, and Jacob as opposed to Esau. And so for thousands of years, there has been an identification of Islam with Ishmael in Judaism and Christianity with Edom or Moab. And so the idea that Christians and Muslims are also sons of Abraham is not foreign to Judaism at all.
And for us, the Abrahamic religions, we see that, and it's to me what's interesting is with Islam is that, having studied it and lived in it for 10 years, is that actually it's not a Christian cult in one sense. If it's to be a cult of something, it is actually a Jewish cult.
Well,
it's much nearer to Judaism in many ways than to Christianity, which is an interesting discussion we should have. We were discussing families, by the way, and I think we ought to get back to that, because I think that was also an interesting run. No one's listening to us at the moment, by the way. There's 6 watching, but
14 watching.
Okay. No one's actually saying anything. So are we happy to go back to families, folks? If you want us to say anything else, just say anything. We can talk about something else. But I think with the families thing, that modernity has enforced a smaller family. And it was one of the interesting things about I read an article in The Economist. I would get The Economist every week. Is that in America, they've just imposed about 10 years ago in certain areas, I think in New York, that if you have a car, you have to have these big seats for quite a long time. And whereas in the old days, you could fit 3 kids across, or maybe 4, now you can only fit 2. So if you want to go from 2 to 3, you have to get a bigger car. You have to upsize quite a lot. And apparently that's proving to be a restraint on family size.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Because all the families I know have minivans, even the ones with only 1 or 2 kids, because or SUVs, because you need all that, you know, for the kids stuff,
the clag,
all the stuff, you know, that everybody has.
Yeah. We had our first one a year and a half into our marriage. We were a little bit earlier than we expected, but we went on a holiday one year, and we had a mini car, a little tiny car, and we just threw our 2 suitcases in the back, and off we went, all happy. A year later, we have a bigger car, and the only way to get the baby into the baby seats in the back is through the middle, because everything else is just completely and utterly packed. That's what babies do to you. Oh, Chess is back. He wants to talk and be nice to you.
Well, Khazi is an admin on this channel. He doesn't need a link to come on this channel.
Is it short for Hezekiah?
So Yechezkel, Ezekiel.
Oh, Ezekiel. Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I wondered which end of the word it was, type thing, because I knew, because one of the things is, of course, whereas English tried to shorten things from the front.
Chizkiah, I don't know that people really use Chizkiah as a. I don't know if I've had any family named Chizkiah. Yechezkel is very common.
Right.
Yechezkel is a very common name. Funny enough, I have had an uncle Eov. So not many Christians name their kids Job. Although we have Job, who, because
he was miserable. You don't want to name your child after someone miserable.
Well, the funny thing about Jews naming their kids Eov is we traditionally believe he wasn't Jewish.
Yes. So, he's pre-Jewish.
Yeah. So
I mean, it's the oldest book in the Bible in some ways. It's like, you know, obviously Genesis covers the oldest bits, but the oldest written bit could be Job.
Yosef doesn't believe it's that old based on the language and the fact that it uses blessing. So,
that's an interesting.
Yeah, because so that may be a later tradition, like to say blessing God instead of cursing God.
Right.
So some people date Job later. Honestly, for me, it's not a huge issue.
No, but it's nice to talk about these things every now and again.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me because what gets me on that is that Job talks about Satan. And actually, in the Pentateuch, in the first 5 books, and in the earliest bits of the Bible, in fact, until quite late, until probably even Isaiah, which is almost the end of the biblical record, Satan is hardly mentioned,
right?
And yet he's front and center in Job.
Yes,
and therefore, if you say, "Oh, it's a later writing," that makes complete sense to me, because actually, as you look in, you know, one of the big transformations of the Old Testament to the New Testament, from from the writings in Hebrew through to the Greek.
Paul, you missed Khalid was here. Like I was doing a randos conversation with him. He was explaining Ahmadiyya. You would have loved it, but he had to go break his fast.
Yeah, I think that one it is actually the arrival of a very definite angels and demons feel. That you don't really see, and I know that modern Judaism has that strong feel as well, but that's presumably because there's a whole, both Christianity and Judaism came into the Pharisaic period, and I'm going to call it that in the nicest way possible, where the Pharisees were people who were honestly wrestling with a situation which they hadn't seen before, i.e. that Jews lived so far away from the temple they didn't know how to get to the temple on a regular basis, and invented synagogue.
So Father Stephen, actually, it's been interesting hearing him, because he very much believes that modern day Judaism has pruned away a lot of the Enochic material.
Oh.
And so he thinks that modern day Judaism has pruned too much of that away.
Interesting.
And I mean, obviously, they have a much more expanded canon than Judaism and Protestantism does. And so for him, the Enoch material is very important.
Oh. I've read it twice, I think, but I can't say I remember hardly any of it.
So when I first came into this little corner, I would mention Enoch a lot because when Christians would tell me that it's impossible to keep the entirety of the law, it's like, well, what about Enoch? And for me, it was just because of the one line in Genesis, and the fact that he's only mentioned in one line in Genesis made me comfortable in saying, you have no reason to say he sinned. There is no reason for you to say he sinned. So
why would God have taken him up if he had sinned?
So Rashi actually says that he was taken up because God saw that he would in fact sin. God was saving him from his
own potential to sin.
Yes. Chezi, I'm so glad you're here because I need a 5-minute break. I'll be right back.
Hezi, hello.
Hello, sir.
I'm Guy.
I'm here because I love this space, but I know that Jacob is about to get upset at me.
So. Yeah, you're warned, aren't you? You're pre-warned.
I'm pre-warned. He's been hammering me for the last few days.
I understand exactly why you wouldn't want to say that if Dad early on in a conversation like that. That would be just like so heavy. That's understandable.
Well, I'll try to explain some of it when Jacob pops back on.
Is your second name Spiro? Is it Spiro in English with an I, or is it always been an E? I have some friends who are called Spiro.
So it's an E, and all E's are basically related to me.
Right.
I's sometimes can be related to me. It's from a town in Europe, a little village called Spire, and that Spiro, Shapiro. There's a few iterations of that name, but
we were in Czechoslovakia in Prague last year, and have you been? I don't know if you've been to Prague, but it's an amazing place for Jewish stuff, and they've kept one of the synagogues running. But the Second World War wasn't kind to them in that sense, and they have one of the older synagogues. They've actually written everybody's name on the wall. And it's just, I mean, your surname would have garnered at least 2 or 3 big columns of, it was just, I mean, it makes me almost cry just think of it, but it is an amazing thing.
There's a famous synagogue of a rabbi named the Maharal.
Okay.
And he's from Prague, and he was a very famous rabbi, Judah Lau Betzalel. And I think this is like the 1500s, and he famously had the story of the Golem, the Jews in Prague.
Yes.
Right. So there's the statues over there. Speaking about my father recently just made a statue of it, but there's the statue of the Maharal rabbi, and wrapped on his leg is the Golem. But I was discussing very briefly with Yosef Razin about how that relates to AI. And those are early hints of Judaism playing with an idea of, what is a being. The way he wakes up the golem is he stamps his name with God's name on his forehead, whether it's the Tetragrammaton or the word emet, truth. But what is it to create this shell of a man or this entity, and what are what are the implications of that as we are rushing towards creating AGI? We should think about these things.
Yeah, those stories have resonance, don't they? Of course, we do create little AIs. They're called children.
That is true, and they're also not too controllable. You know, saying what the right.
Yeah, it's reverse control most of the time. I think the little cries and everything else. You know, they have you by the heart the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple things working together. There's the fact that as they age, they're, you know, at a certain age, they want to sort of push away, remove themselves from you. And that's really a biological response, a natural response to sort of moving on from the family, finding a wife, going out there. And then later on in life, they realize that, man, mom and dad knew what they were talking about. And they have to, like, come back.
You realize you are your father.
So I was telling this to my wife. There was an interaction with my son, and he's old enough to remember these interactions like I remember these interactions with my dad. And it's very clear to me sometimes. I'm like, I just recreated the same exact experience I had. So it's it's sort of it's unavoidable in a certain sense. And I try to tell myself that I am trying to exercise and emulate the best of my father and grandfather and so on and so forth. So it's a little different. But yeah, very difficult to transfer wisdom to children.
Yes. Yes.
They just won't listen.
But actually, I think human beings, as much as anything else, learn by rubbing up against each other, which is why being alone is such a poor thing for us. I have a group that from my church, and you know, we generally full of people who don't rub up against each other, and it doesn't work well. And then they suddenly find community in church and say, "Yeah, I didn't know what was going on, but now I'm addicted."
Jacob was discussing, you know, that I just made it with 3 kids.
Yeah.
See, I think I'm thinking 4 is a minimum, because each one should have a brother and a sister. So you have to have 2 boys and 2 girls.
Prove it. You can't work it that way, Jacob.
We definitely can in the future.
I have a friend, and his parents wanted a daughter. They had 4 sons and then a daughter, and the sons knew they weren't wanted, basically. Not a great place to be.
Well, my nephew Ryan is the 3rd son, and yeah, I know several 3rd sons and 1 3rd daughter who it was very obvious they were trying one more time for the other and didn't get it. But once you start having 5, 6, you don't have to worry so much about that.
I have them. Well, we will be moving soon, and there'll be more space. But even now, when there's still another room I could use, I have both my boys and their sister together in one room right now. I just think it's I like that you know, bedtime is together. I like that they have that experience sort of together. And my attitude is, even though I tell them to, you know, it's bedtime, as long as they're talking, thinking I don't know, but they're talking to each other, I'm fine with that. I want that kind of conversation to be happening. I tell this to my wife sometimes, that there are times that we need to allow them to get into trouble and not say anything, because they need to feel that they're testing the limit sometimes, and they need to feel that they got away with it. And that's difficult to sort of watch that scenario. It's like, you know, even if my wife was looking at me, my daughter fell down in the park, and she was there with her friend, and she looked at me, and I turned around to look at her and sort of assess if, like, she was too hurt. And I looked at my wife, I'm like, you know, what? Like, she's crying, let her get up. Like, you know, so it's difficult to do. And maybe I'm a little too cold about that, but
there's a great English phrase that says, "Whoops-a-daisy," when they fall over.
Exactly. That's sort of the attitude. I don't know. There's, you know, I think, what's his name? Jacob, you'll know, the Coddling of the American Mind, Jonathan Haidt. He was, if I recall correctly, was talking about this whole free range space for kids. And he had these parks where you drop off your kid for like 2 to 3 hours and the parent leaves and you just let the kids, it's Lord of the Flies, so to speak, but you let the kids, you know, roam and do their thing. And it's funny that
when I was 10, we used to go out into the street and we had to be home by dark.
Yeah, my mother-in-law was in conniptions. She's from the States. When I told her that, like, you know, her first-year-old grandson is going to be taking a bus by himself, like a 30-minute bus from our house to the old city of Jerusalem, you know, which is like a tense area. And I'm like, you know, builds character, Mom. Don't worry about it. Like, he'll be fine. But yeah, but I ultimately think that's the right move. It's just, you know, the world. I mean, as I'm saying that, this is something that we were all telling the woke community, so to speak, back in the day when Ben Shapiro in his heyday was talking in schools. You know, the line was, when these children get to their corporate firms or the real world will straighten them up. But that doesn't seem to be the case. The case seems to be that everyone
it's already baked in. It's already baked in. Wait, you've got to. Sorry, Chizzy, to say, but it's if you don't get it early, you can't bake it in.
Hey, Paul.
How you doing, Hezzy?
Poor
guy.
I'm waiting for the wrath of Jacob. Hit it, Jacob.
Yeah.
You could tell me
what a bad son you are. So explain to us what you've been hiding from us, Qazi.
I don't think I was hiding anything. I mentioned this actually with my randos conversation. I thank you again for the time, Paul, I had with Paul. And I was mentioning that my father was a psychologist and that we were aware of Jordan Peterson and some of this conversation. And the reason I was attracted to this was because I was hearing Jordan Peterson sort of speak on a public form and in a public scale of sort of what I've heard growing up. Now, the reason I didn't introduce my father to this little corner is, which I mentioned to Jacob, is the internet has a way of messing with us at times. It requires a tremendous amount of attention. And knowing my 70-year-old father, I think he would be fairly popular in a place like this. And I don't know if that's the right thing for him. And I don't know if that's the right thing for him. Like, I could easily see, I was explaining to Jacob, my father is very talented. He's an artist. But he will.
He's really well spoken.
He will pick up a piece of clay and create a beautiful sculpture and then decide for the next year to invest tremendous amount of money on, you know, sculpting material. But then he's done with that. And then he's on to the next thing where he's also fantastic in. So, but then you have to think of, there's a woman that lives with him. Her house is completely overtaken by sculptures, right? And she just wants to like move through. So I have to think about my mom saying, I want to come to one of the kids' birthday party, but your dad won't leave because he's talking to John Vervaeke, or your dad won't go because he these things. Now, there's other there which Paul magically handles very well. I see my father responding to comments. You know what I mean? Like, Claire starts writing to him stuff. He's going to be like, who's this person? Bop, bop, bop. And like, hey, Dad, you didn't leave the house in like 4 weeks. Maybe you should like, come over. So I gave Jacob an example from the Talmud where there are these rabbis and they are looking for a, I believe, for a red heifer for the temple. And it's known that this Gentile has one. And they go over to the Gentile, but he's sleeping, and his father and his son is there. And the son says, I'm sorry, guys, I can't wake up my dad. Like, I understand you guys want to make this deal, but he's napping right now. and they give him this crazy amount of money, and he still says no. And at the end, miraculously, it ends up working out. But the message, the moral of the story is that we learn respecting one's parents from this Gentile. And my point to Jacob was that I realized this could be something that my father would enjoy. I hope that I'm not waking him up for the right reasons. But are
you respecting him, or are you?
What's your move in here, Jacob? Huh? What's your motivation, my friend?
My motivation. You see this man? He was known during his lifetime to be the best candidate we had to be the Messiah. I am a messianist. I believe in the coming of the Messiah. And when I took a look at the work that Khazi's father has been doing for 40 years, and how it goes along with everything that the meaning crisis is, like, I'm like, Khazi, why are you hiding like this jewel? And he's like, oh, because I know better than my father how to be an adult.
I will say, Khazi, that if my father were alive, it would be very interesting too, because he would have been all over this little corner, and he would have been doing conversations. But he, I don't know that when you describe your father, he sounds a lot more like my sister. My sister's very much like that. And you can go watch her on YouTube because she does know the internet, but she burns through things quickly. So leaving, as you say, all sorts of things in her wake for her family to clean up.
Jacob, like you said, ultimately you could go over my head and decide to, do whatever you want. And it's not like I had like this little secret. There's plenty of things I'm learning on this channel all the time. This channel is fantastic. It is true that growing up to a psychologist and a fairly well-read and open-minded person, I got to experience some of this wisdom, and but that's true on many in many religious communities. People that have this treasure trove, so to speak, it's a little easier for them to navigate these waters. But there's a limit of what my exposure to Christianity was like with my dad. Like, I mean, my mom is a lot more, in a certain sense, a lot more strict or traditional than my father was. So, like, she would be having like none of this. But this is why this channel is so amazing. Like, I would hope that my mother and father did a good job raising their son, where some of these things that my father taught are being embodied by me, and this is what's being introduced into this community. And I'm not saying, Jacob, that like my father is like, I'm nothing, I'm not worthy, he's amazing. But my point being, he is trying to raise an individual or raise an individual who is taking his Torah and his teachings and trying to integrate them in the real world over here. So, be happy with that product. As Jacob eats his
I agree with Phlebas, as he is my Christian Reformed brother in this, and he in fact did introduce another family member to me, and he has some questions as to whether that was wise, because I directed that family member to a group that I knew could give him more attention than I could, and it's been quite an interesting journey. So,
Jacob, before I move on to something a different topic, you're welcome to. I'm giving you another minute to call me a heretic.
Don't give him any. Don't give him any.
It's my channel.
So, are they Morge too, or are they Akami beans?
What you're eating?
Oh, these are edamame. Yeah.
He lives in California. That's what we eat here.
Yeah.
Those are our snacks.
I'm having suet pudding. because I'm on the right side of the pond. I have to say, just to make sure that people are happy with that, is that it is with vegetable suet.
Oh. So, Khazi, did you take your father to see Jordan Peterson with your brothers?
Binary answer.
First of all, he didn't go with me and my brothers, but this is part of, and I'm trying to say this respectfully without, like, my dad's like less interested in seeing Jordan Peterson. He's like, yeah, okay, like, what's the guy talking about? Like, and that itself, like, I don't know if that's the right attitude for this place. Like, my dad's like a big personality, so like he's
and we never have any personalities in this corner.
Very boring individuals, non-controversial.
I mean, he's impressed by him, and also sort of not as interested. Like, my dad, like, rather write his next book, or like, you know, or like work on a sculpture. He's like not like a Peterson fanboy, so to speak.
Okay, yeah, and that's great, because first of all, I don't think we need Peterson fanboys. Your father has for 40 years been teaching clinical psychology. And his work, which I tried to dig into a little bit, like you saw, I didn't fanboy over him. The poor guy's a Freudian. God have mercy on his soul. But like, that doesn't matter. He has things to contribute to this dialogue and this conversation. And if he doesn't want to, that's one thing. But if he does want to, and you're holding him back, it's like, how dare you? How would you feel if your son treated you like you're treating him?
My kids treat me like that all the time. My daughter just sent me a recommendation for TV, and I said to my wife, honey, should we watch this? She's like, no. Then she said about that maybe she doesn't want her parents watching this recommendation. So there's a lot of layers in this adult parent child thing. So I'm Team Chezi with this.
Jacob,
you gotta keep your worlds apart.
I'm trying. I'm trying to protect him. I know you realize that. I know you think that that's nonsense.
And this is why. This is why
his way here anyway, Jacob.
Jacob thinks you're trying to protect yourself. That's the real difficulty.
No. I would disappear in a second, and I'm all good with that. Like,
it's absolutely not true. And if I really wanted to, I could just contact his father.
You'll have a blast.
But
I know, Bruce. That's like what I've been thinking for the last few days.
I actually respect the reasons Chezi has, which is why I'm trying to convince him
publicly.
I tried privately too. But shame works.
By the way, Jacob, I would also say that 40 years ago, some of the ideas were more novel. And you know, growing up in, I know you don't like the term ultra-Orthodox, so Haredi, which means God-fearing. The reason I don't use that term is just because I see myself as God-fearing. So they shouldn't have, you know, it's not there to claim that name. But either way, in that community, growing up in a neighborhood that was very close to mine, talking about Jacob fighting the angel as an allegory, or so that was more novel at the time.
That would go down well.
How long ago?
Again, like 40 years ago or so. So, like, you know, that's like a conversation. I mean, and the conversations like that happened, obviously, but I'm talking about within our circles, talking about that more publicly, or at the very least, like at the Shabbat dinner table, like very openly talking about those concepts or flowing around with those concepts. There are people that are having these conversations today. Do I think he has things to contribute? Yes. Do I wish he would be like less dense with how he wrote and less technical? Potentially. But Jordan Peterson is having like the biggest, biblical theological conversation out there right now. So, you know, and yes, Dennis Prager and Ben Shapiro are not like their representatives for Judaism.
I enjoy Dennis Prager, but every time, all those episodes with Ben Shapiro, it's like,
He's a robot.
I met him, and he is exactly like that.
I believe it.
Yeah. He's an inch taller than me, which made me very uncomfortable.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm too short. No, he was all right.
Don't go near Paul.
It's just a strange. I find it interesting to see him getting into these discussions at all now. I always thought that he would stay in his lane, Ben. So I don't know if that's growth or not. Yeah, I'm not really sure.
Spiro, the world is his lane.
Yeah, that seems to be the case now. Yeah, at one point I thought it was very specific, but not anymore.
It's weird that Jordan is like, the few times I've heard Jordan speak about Ben Shapiro, he's always talking about how smart he is, but I don't know.
Well, he is smart. He's not dumb. Okay. He's smart. That doesn't mean he's theologically aligned with people or Orthodox Jews across the world or wise, but he might be very smart. He is.
And
he's not deep.
He admits.
I think he's deep in his own regard.
Oh, hold on. No. He's not deep in Jewish learning.
Yeah, that's true, probably. That. Yeah.
His level of Jewish learning is very cursory, and even more cursory than mine. And my level of Jewish knowledge is not where, like, an actual person who is considered a scholar, like, you listen to Rabbi Breitowitz and one of his Q&As. Like, if you haven't listened to one of Rabbi Breidowitz's Q&As, I highly recommend it, because you hear, like, people asking him questions from all over, and he has all of it at his fingertips. And it's a level of depth of knowledge of Torah that it's awe-inspiring.
So I'm going to bring something in here. Bear with me for a moment. I want to see how this lands and how this relates to this little corner. But there's this rabbi, Ethiopian rabbi, named Dr. Shalom Sharon. And he would be considered modern Orthodox in Israel. And this is part of an ongoing saga in Israel with the Ethiopian Jews, who were recognized as the lost tribe of Dan. And they were incorporated in the Israeli society, Jewish society, which involved also some military and government operations of extracting Ethiopians and bringing them into Israel. Now, this rabbi recently wrote a book. Well, sorry, I'll take a step back. The Ethiopian community and its tradition sets it back after the first exile. So, hey, Sam, the temple gets destroyed and they, branch off to themselves, as in they don't have contact with the Talmud. They don't have contact with the halakha codex that's being developed over these years. In the establishment of Israel in a few years following that, they get into contact with Jews over here, and they're brought over, and they are forced to go through a conversion, even though they're considered Jewish, but they're not. They're some of the community is doubtful about this, and they have to also go through this like sort of minor circumcision procedure, which was very demeaning at the time. And all their sages are being told, like, you guys are considered Jewish, but forget all this fossilized Judaism, First Temple that you guys know. You guys gotta sort of join the gang over here and update your iOS. Now, this rabbi is
it sounds like when evangelicals become Catholic. It's like, you're a Christian, we probably need to rebaptize you, we think, and you're definitely going to need to go through catechism again.
Right.
Not saying you're not Christian, but
this rabbi, when he was a student, asked one of his rabbis, why am I doing this? Why are you guys making me go through this conversion? And he says, like, listen, at the end of the day, if you want to get into the dating circle, if you want to be part of the community over here, you don't want people doubting, like, where you are, where you come from. Today, his whole attitude is that if Judaism has a live treasure trove which is this authentic version of Judaism going all the way back to the first temple. And it shouldn't be just pushed aside, as in it should be looked at as at least an option to reassess rabbinic law, how to move forward, and how to look at the other communities. And I was thinking how that potentially relates to Christianity, you know, breaking off from Judaism. Is it, and I know Jacob wouldn't agree with this, is it one of the options that Judaism we're dealing with? Or is this like, you know, as if the Pharisees and this is like a illegitimate break off? But when I look at the Ethiopians and, you know, their traditions, it's, you know, it's very different, but very similar. They also have a blessing for everything, but it's one blessing. While I have intricate blessings, you know, one for the tree and one for the cloud and one for the thunder, their blessing just covers all. The way they pray is a little different. But I think definitely in Judaism, we should be able to still accept that and see that as legitimate while still moving on. So I leave that for you to play with.
How different?
Can I say something? Sorry,
I
have another example of the same thing. So first of all, I've met an Ethiopian Jewish lady up on the Golan Heights. She was doing a military service, and she felt that the whole community was actually discriminated against quite badly. But I was in Uzbekistan, and the Bukharan Jews have the same problem, that they're although they're much nearer to modern Judaism, they're Sephardic and beyond Sephardic into Central Asia. And basically the Jewish, when they were thinking about going Aliyah, then the rabbis came over from Israel and said, here's the book. Here's the, I've actually got a copy on my shelf somewhere. They said, you know, this is how you should be praying. And they're saying, but this isn't how we prayed as kids. This isn't what we had. And they, obviously, being under the Soviet Union, a lot of it was lost anyway. It all became very folky. But, you know, basically, Western classic Hasidic Judaism was being imposed onto the Bukharan Jews. So most of them went to New York. It was safer there.
How similar are the Ethiopian Jews to like Samaritans in a certain sense? Because it sounds sort of similar in that they're like got some shared First Temple DNA, but not shared post Second Temple exilic DNA.
Correct. So there are similarities. I wouldn't be able to tell you. I don't know off the top of my head like the major differences, but there's differences. But just
aren't Samaritans syncretistic in the sense they have other? I'm not even going to call them gods, but other people they're very interested in.
Other people they're interested in?
Okay, let me. So,
spirits.
Chezi doesn't at all put any sort of stock into a line that Orthodox Judaism has been trying to maintain so that all of Orthodox Judaism can keep in a communion together and be one community, which is the Shulchan Aruch, this code of Jewish law written by Rabbi Joseph Cairo around the year 1500 that has become the catechism of the entire Jewish community. And with very rare exceptions, 99.999% of all Jews come from communities which accepted the Shulchan Aruch. And so it's really cute, especially coming from people who, for all kinds of reasons that have very little to do with religion and a lot more to do with politics, want to be very inclusive of people and want to allow anything to call itself Judaism. But if we don't hold the line at Shulchan Aruch, guess what's going to happen? In a very short amount of time, we're going to have as many Orthodox Jewish denominations as Protestants do.
So I wanna let Sam. He wanted to say something, but I wanna just respond to that, Jacob. That even this rabbi is not saying it, and I'm not saying that we should now revert back to what this community has to offer. What I'm saying is it's silly to ignore, this community and to not.
Who's ignoring them?
1 second, hear me out, brother. It's to look at them and take stock and reassess, because at some point you see yourself stagnating and you see yourself not moving, and you have to see how do you start incorporating and having a larger umbrella, so to speak, that potentially could host more individuals within the community. And there are other Jewish communities out there that potentially could give you a quote unquote legitimate source how to do that.
And if the Jewish community fragments into as many denominations as the Protestants have, what are you going to do then?
We're fine, No,
Sam, it's not the same, because I can walk into any Orthodox synagogue and we all have Shulchan Aruch, which keeps that, it defines what is we call the 4 cubits of halacha. And Chezi wants to get rid of this line that delineates between what is inside Judaism and what is outside of Orthodox Judaism.
I'll give you an example, Jacob. If, so to speak, if I'm trying to speak to, let's say, specifically the Jewish population, and I'm looking at, let's say, a secular population, and I'm saying I want there to be some sort of spectrum where I don't have to necessarily have the standard of the most pious Jew in the world, which that standard almost never existed in Jewish history, them keeping on all these laws and all these halachic traditions. Can I create a spectrum where people could feel more comfortable and slowly make their way across the spectrum and move across the spectrum and still allow a place where someone could feel traditional or even be within the group of religious and not necessarily be experiencing his life the same way as I am?
So let me translate this in a very uncharitable translation for our Gentile audience here.
Please.
Chezi wants to figure out a way so that the state of Israel, which of course isn't a theocracy and can't be a theocracy, can still be the type of theocracy he would like it to be. And the actual answer is to recognize that no, the state of Israel can't be a theocracy because Judaism doesn't have enough rules for a theocracy, and to abandon this political Zionist mirage that Chezi would like to call, what did you call that? Well, you certainly used Reshit Smichat Gelotenu, Hashem Yerachem Aleinu.
I said we shouldn't use that term anymore because it's not the beginning of the redemption. I said the building of the state of Israel is the redemption, and I'm saying that the redemption isn't the goal. That's not the end point. That is the starting point.
Can we get this out?
What? Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, so what does what kind of theocracy are we talking about? I feel like this is similar to the Christian nationalist conversation in the United States, where no one ever really says what they mean. And either the people are like, man, Christian nationalism is this evil new thing. They think something. And then even the people are like, I believe in Christian nationalism. I support something, but I don't know what the something is. And so what would theocracy look like for Israel?
Not very different than it looks now, and that still doesn't mean it would look different. But I don't see there being priests running the government, but I see the government, even if it's a secular government, and I'm okay with different versions of how you play the political game. As in, it makes sense right now that the game is democracy, but this might sound controversial. If a monarchy would make sense globally, and we could see that that's working out across the world. And this is also what the Bible tells us, that when we come to the land and we look at the other nations and see what they're doing, we could adopt that kind of system. So you're giving me that faith, Jacob. Does it not say that we look around and see?
So, but Hezi, you said a king?
I could even see something like that working. If that is, if my point being, if
there's a Jewish king, do you know how much the American dispensationalists are going to have an absolute freak out? But in any case,
yes, please, let's have one of those.
Point, Sam, my specific point was the Bible
Zionist halomot causing you to absolutely destroy Yiddishkeit in order to save your political dreams. That's all I see here.
But that's why you need Ethiopian and Bukharan Judaism and Sephardic Judaism, because they never spoke Yiddish.
Sam, I think the theocracy, how it plays out over here is that there's a dialogue between the religious and the secular, and secular being, let's say, the government. Rabbis and priests don't know how to run budgets and don't know how to run an army or any one of those sectors.
Maybe like a judicial class?
Yes.
So basically a religiously structured judiciary.
Now, much of that is already instituted already. The way we live all our lives as liberal people, a lot of these things already, Bible law and ethics are already woven into our society. Yes, there would be differences. Now, people run and say like, oh, it would turn into like Iran, or we're going to be stoning people. So the answer is that's gobbledygook. That's anyone
turning into Iran doesn't require stoning people, Hezi.
Or women not driving, or women staying at home, or any interpretation. Anyone that is reading halakha, Jewish law, in that through that lens is just not reading it correctly.
I am not talking about whether or not I would love personally to have the option to live in a community under halakha, but what halakha itself allows is enough freedom for people to have religious. There's a reason why we are in galut. I
don't know what galut means.
Exile.
This is all your
galuting,
horrible.
Jacob, you can go Aliyah.
This is all your horrible political stuff perverting Judaism. And that's why I am so against your rabid Zionism trying to destroy my religion.
So I'm curious, how do you start a new kingship?
No, again, I'll stress that would only happen.
Paul's comment up, please, because I think it's good.
That would only happen if that model proved to be a successful model. As in, if
so
right now,
judiciary first, and then, but I mean, I can imagine something that's sort of like a chill Jewish judiciary that isn't stoning people and isn't Iran and is letting women drive. And then you have something like a parliamentary democratic constitutional monarchy, kind of a la England.
Right.
But, like the English monarchy, that one is pretty darn old. And starting a monarchy from scratch sounds very...
The state of Israel about a week ago just almost fell apart because they were trying to make a tiny change in how the current high court. So these are all complete chalomot out of nowhere, where
it's a Kairos moment,
which have no capacity in
Jacob was saying,
to ever be reality outside of a supernatural coming of the Messiah. Well, and that's why we have to remember, Mipnei chatatenu galinu mi'artzenu, and that's why we are in exile, is because of our sins, and doing political machinations will never create the spiritual reality that needs to exist in order for us to have the coming of the Messiah, which hasn't happened yet. Ugh.
Not even Chez's dad.
I would say, Jacob, again, two things. One, Sam, my point about the king was the Bible gives a verse that when we come to the land and we look around what the other nations are doing, we could put a king onto ourselves. It's not a recommendation. There's something we could do. I look at king and I put their political system or the best game in town. Okay. As in Judaism and the Bible is not telling you, we know the best way to, what the law of the land was going to be and how to best govern a people. It could be that you'll still need some sort of system. And it could be that the nations around you will come up with a system that makes sense. And if so, and if it does make sense, you should adopt it. Now, looking at democracy, even if there was a theocracy over here, I would still, and this is what Judaism believes, do whatever you want in your house, right? There's no one's coming into your house and making you put on phylacteries or checking if your dietary restrictions are being upheld. There's what's happening in the public square, which already in Israel, Sabbath is the day off. No one is working or driving on the Day of Atonement. There are many things that are already integrated inside on Passover and on many different holidays. It's already built in.
Israel does have a peculiar dance of religion and secular that is almost like Christianity in America in the South in like the 1950s or something, where it's so culturally integrated that, of course, no one does anything on Sundays, and you never want to be seen drinking, or at least not too much, and a bunch of those sorts of things, even though, of course, it's a constitutional democracy. But I still feel like this is one of those things. I was talking a little bit about this with Kale and Paul on our live stream, is that I feel like monarchy always requires some connection to divinity. And the only counterexample that I can kind of think of in the modern world is like the Kim regime in North Korea, which has started to turn into a hereditary monarchy, basically. And they quasi-divinize themselves, but they don't quite have a theology of how that works, but they just kind of act it out in this sort of weird, kind of unclarified way, as best I can tell.
So I don't see that playing out well. And Jacob he was saying that like I'm living in dreamland, and this is why we're still in exile because of our sins, right? So I hope I represented that well. I see the return to the land after 2,000 years. So many prophecies being actualized on the ground. I see that as redemption, as the starting point, not the end goal, and only as a people that could be in a political body and are no longer at the behest of other entities and countries. While I understand there's still U.S. involvement in our politics, we now for the first time could start expressing ourselves. And that is a process. It's been 75 years. It hasn't been forever. It's extremely impressive. And that's why when I said Kairos moment, what happened right now politically is because there is a tension with the secular and the religious over here, because the name is Israel. All the streets you go on are biblical. It's built in.
Do you want to talk about the Basar Lavan controversy that almost destroyed Israel?
As far as having like bacon in the country?
Yes, in the country at all.
So they have a status quo, and there's other places where they have a status
quo. No bacon, no peace.
So in Israel, like in Jerusalem, there's no public transportation on the Sabbath, and in Haifa, there is. And this is what's still left from the status quo that's being maintained from like the British mandate. And because we have to do this dance, however, and this is both internally and into the world, if we don't feel comfortable saying why we're in the land of Israel and what we're doing over here, then we won't be able to handle the world pressure, and we won't be able to handle the pressure inside. So
I have a great answer to that, but I would rather hear Raj speak.
Please go ahead.
Well, I had a question actually. What's the status of like aristocracy? So Sam was talking about you can't really, you need to have some sort of theology to divinize the king. But I figure one of the ways a king pops up the other way is through a system of aristocracy. And then like the old idea of democracy in Athens and stuff like that is not election, but selection. And so you have to have these people who show an aristocracy of the noble, and from there you select a king. And I know that sounds completely divorced from what we have now, but like you need to be able, like there needs to be a way of elevating whole groups of people, like families, that are embodying the ideal that we're looking for. Otherwise, to just pick an ideal out of nowhere, someone who's going to be able to embody the nation or the state as a king from, I don't know, just like out of random, just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. The king's always attached to a lineage.
This is all like up in the air. Like maybe in 500 years, something like this could be. This isn't even close.
I don't know. Sometimes things happen. You know, the French Revolution didn't think they would get an emperor out of the whole thing. Not that it lasted that long, but they kind of did for a while. But again, that's another way that kings pop up, is some sort of great revolutionary military victor. That's a relatively common way to create a new line of kings, like Julius Caesar. But even then, even like Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus had to do this weird dance for like the first couple decades before it really wasn't like an outright, monarchy.
You are absolutely right. We might have blood running in the streets with a bloody revolution, if that's the type of thing that might in fact cause something like this. But I personally don't think that's a manifestation of the coming of the Messiah.
Jacob, you mentioned just how quickly things could change. You mentioned about earlier on the stream about your sister walking, and then you told her maybe move somewhere else, and then nothing happened in the end. And then your parents said, like, see, nothing happened. It could, things are so combustible today in the world. The wrong tweet from Elon Musk could, affect the market, which could, send people riding on the streets. The Prime Minister of Israel fired his Minister of Security of Defense, and within 15 minutes, there were hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. So things can change very quickly. I would agree with Raj that, again, entertaining a conversation like a king, even in Judaism, there are criteria. So like this would be a leader. It's not something you just pick willy-nilly. And we have no leaders like that today. So
I am saying when we see our society unraveling in this way, that we're looking at civil war both here and in other countries, then the reasonable, rational thing is not to be out there considering what weird, new, great thing that might happen. Maybe we need to be thinking about our society actually working in small steps towards being better than it is, as opposed to just itching for a revolution where in 20 years, if in 20 years it is illegal to import pork into Israel, because certainly there's nowhere in halacha where you can actually have pig farms in Israel. Like that's not going to fly. Whereas there are kibbutzim who already have pigs, and so like you're already changing things so much that it's going to take a bloodbath for such a thing to happen.
But the 500 year idea that you're talking about, it's like That's the way that I think you have to think about it. We have to figure out how to re-engage generational transfer so that you can build a family like that through time that becomes these people who make these small moves. No. And that's not a very satisfying answer, but you have to, people need to stop thinking of, like, we think so narrowly. There are people who think 1900 was a long time ago. And we need to start being able to think that, like, okay, what is it that I want my children to do? What is it that I want my grandchildren to do? And it's not dictating every aspect of their life, but like, what is this purpose? What is the purpose of this family? The idea that a family has a purpose is almost completely gone. Like my grandparents immigrated to this country, and I have to think about this. They came here. What reason did they come here for? Was it so that I could lose my identity and start buying a culture? No, that's not why they came here.
I mean, I agree with you 100%, but that goes exactly counter to everything Chazi is trying to do.
What are we doing in Israel?
Throwing the Shulchan Aruch out.
No, I did not say I'm throwing out the Halacha Codex, and that's a separate conversation of how it needs to be updated and when it needs to be updated. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying is you're saying we need to work first on society on small steps. Part of those small steps would be, how do we better engage with our Ethiopian brothers? And how do we better engage with the other communities and try to create now you could be like, the uniform voice and language we have is called the halacha. And I'm saying that there is a exile version of halacha, which kept us for 2,000 years, but that is all learning how to live. When we have a state is when the actual living takes place. This is when we need to start manifesting what we were studying for 2,000 years. That doesn't mean it's necessarily going to look like what we were learning. And it doesn't necessarily mean that what was created, which I've dubbed like this exoskeleton, we don't have to feel that it's weighing us down or trapping us when we are already in our homeland. At some point, we need to be able to remove this exoskeleton and move forward. And some of those tensions are secular Judaism right now, or secular Israelis are bumping up against a very specific version of Judaism, which has political power. And they see that as, this is what Judaism is representing, and this is what it represents to the world. And we could have a completely different conversation if the political Judaism wasn't being represented by, Europe in the 1600s.
What's interesting about the 1600s, though, is that you've got Jacob talking about the codification of Ashkenazi Judaism, effectively.
It's not Ashkenazi Judaism. No, Rabbi Cairo was Sephardic. This is...
Okay, I apologize. Of modern Judaism.
I'm Sephardic. Yeah, of modern Judaism.
I was thinking about that as I said it, and I realized that it wasn't helpful. But so that getting you called it a creed, interestingly enough.
Catechism. Yeah.
And it's interesting that, in the 1600s, of course, Protestantism was getting its own little catechism about sola fide and all that sort of stuff, sola scriptura. What's interesting, I think, Raj, that are you Sikh?
Yeah.
When's the first guru?
1469.
Isn't that an interesting moment? Suddenly, all these things are stirring in the pot, and obviously Sam's stuff is more recent because he's a heretic from a heretic. But
hey, the Unitarians, we wrote our first catechisms in like the 1550s, so we were there too.
Oh, right. Okay.
Jacob, but you don't think it's
interesting? It's historic. We are historic, long historic, communities, but.
Mm-hmm. Think how backwards it is that you have Ethiopian Jews dressing up, wearing the garb of Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, dressing up as someone who doesn't accept them fully as Jews.
First of all, this is part of the problem of people who don't, and Andrew is a catechumen in the Coptic Church. And one of the discussions I have had with him about him converting within the Coptic Church is because I know from history, including Jewish history, that the priest, Pope Tadros III himself, could baptize Andrew. And there would still be people at that church who would be like, he's not Coptic. They're never going to accept him as Coptic, right? Because they're not religious enough to believe that when you go under that water and you come out back up, that changes something in you that is actually more important than what you look like or who your parents were, that you become a part of our tribe. So the religious Jews, the actual Haredi Jews, are the ones who accept converts, including, yes, they accept converts.
They wouldn't accept Moses today.
You're absolutely wrong. You are absolutely wrong.
No hat.
See, this is the thing. It's people who actually convert and become. I know people who are who look Asian. There's a reason why Nissim Black is a Haredi Hasidic Jew, and he went to the Stipler, and he didn't go to modern Orthodoxy because he would never be accepted in modern Orthodoxy.
What? Well, of course he would be accepted. And the reason most converts don't become modern Orthodox is because no one wants to move from one extreme to something that sort of looks like the life I was living before. It's too confusing. You're going to tell someone that listen, you could be Jewish, but you could still do all the things that you did before, just a little different.
Right. You don't have a Jewish identity. And that's what I dislike about modern Orthodoxy. Yes.
Raj, how does someone become a guru?
Become a guru? You don't become a guru.
All right. So where do gurus come from, I guess?
The first guru, I mean, he's one with God. And then he is, then when the disciple comes and proves himself to embody that consciousness, he gives him the stamp of approval and he bows before the disciple. And then the guruship moved from the guru to the disciple. And then that is then formalized in the Khalsa, where then that's where it's like our baptism. And then when you participate in that, then you're part of the guru's body, because there is no human guru anymore, no singular figure. And there's the Guru Granth Sahib, which is the scripture, the Bani, the voice. And so the Khalsa are the ones who enact Bani. And Bani is a very peculiar kind of scripture. It's almost like only the book of Psalms, but for the whole thing. Something.
And they enact it, you say? They're like an embodiment of the scripture?
Yeah, but the scripture is all poetry and hymns. And there's not like, there's not any legalism in it.
So is there only one guru at a time?
No. Okay, you're not understanding.
There's not one anymore.
Okay.
There isn't
one. There's no human guru.
No. There was a guru. Now there's a Khalsa, which is many people. It is
many people, but they share in the body or spirit of guruhood.
Yeah. So the way the guru describes it is where there's one of my Sikhs, there's a disciple. Where there's two, there's Sangat or congregation. When there's five, there is my very own form itself. And so the idea is that
sounds strangely similar to some Christian things.
Yeah.
And so there's on the call stuff. So and what's the word? I'm sorry, for a person who is participating in guruhood.
The Khalsa, the pure
Khalsa. And there, you said one with God.
it's the ideal. The guru was one with God. The Khalsa are the ones who are striving. They're kind of like, the way someone described it recently in a podcast I heard, is that they're like the civil servants of the Fund, or the whole Sikh community. So these are people who have dedicated themselves to serving all of the Sikhs, whether you keep hair or if you don't keep hair, you're the person who is there to transmit Sikhi to the next generation.
Just to clarify for Sam, the Khalsa includes hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions. So we're not talking about.
So the guru is one with God, and then the Khalsa participate as the guru's body now.
Yes.
And so they have a oneness with God through the guru.
Yeah, like the goal is like the idea is you become so drenched in Barney and love that like that would be the ideal that you're manifesting, right?
Man, that's like so similar to the Gospel of John. It's almost eerie.
Judaism has, I'm trying to think if this relates, they have like the 36 righteous hidden Jews in every generation, and they protect the whole Jewish community, and they greet the face of the Shekhinah every morning, if I recall correctly. No one knows who these are. And when someone dies, the people say like, "Oh, he was one of them." Like he was like a
interesting. So one is aspiring to become sort of more and more cleanly participating in guruhood.
Yeah, you could frame it like that. Like you're trying to, like the big impediment in your life is homemade, I be. So this sense of my individual self that belongs to me. And what you have to do is, like, if you want to play this game of love with me, yeah, so there's the one of the lines from Barney goes, if you want to play this game of love with me, chop off your head and use it as a ball. And then in the original establishment of the Khalsa, the Guru Gobind Singh Ji asked for the heads of his disciples, for 5 of them. And then they gave up their heads. And then after they had given up their heads, he then bowed to them. And he was then put into the Khalsa by them. So the master has to lower himself to the disciple, and he's signaling there that the community at large has become capable. That the guru is the servant of the ones who are the servants. It's it's
an inverted triangle.
If you seek to follow me, pick up your cross and follow me. Yeah.
Right.
I think what's interesting is that as you know, Raj, that period in Indian history was very, very sort of difficult because you've got a massive invasion from outside of not only invaders, but actually invaders with a new religion coming into a very diffuse religious environment of Hinduism that didn't even call itself Hinduism at the time. It didn't have a name.
Right.
And the people who are Sikhs now and became a people, a clan or whatever you want to call it, but a group.
Yeah, we would consider ourselves a nation.
Group, a nation. Fine.
Yeah.
I didn't want to use that word without you giving it permission, so to speak. But it's very interesting that nation actually stood the barrier between the two groups, and that's where you live in the Punjab. It's a very difficult place to be. And that tension created that.
Yeah, and it's a very odd thing because it's the relationship with God that provided nationhood.
Yeah, I could name probably only one other nation of a similar kind, where the religion and the nation are together so clearly and closely.
With Jacob, go ahead.
Me?
Well, I was going to ask Jacob, since Sam is here, do you mind if we switch gears for a moment or the conversation and talk about AI for a second? So, Sam, Jacob and I have this discussion often, and he's like, "We'll wait for Sam. We'll wait for Joseph. For Yosef. They'll know." So, do you think? How long do you think it's going to take till AI or AGI, these are buzzwords today, start having changes that affect the human psychology, or how humans see themselves?
I mean, I think in some sense that's already kind of happening, but the thing that I worry about or think about with respect to AI, at least currently, is I think part of the reason what's giving a lot of people a lot of confusion on this topic is I think human brains have very sophisticated inbuilt machinery for thinking about other minds. But we basically think that they're human minds like our minds. And we sort of have the category of person, not person, right? And we can deal with things like dogs, but even when we deal like dogs, I think you can see a lot of pet owners over personify their pets, right? Where it's this human that this is a mind like my mind over fitting to an animal that isn't quite really a human. And that, throughout human history, we've never had to interact with minds more powerful than ours that are of a different species. I'll leave God and supernatural spirit beings out of the equation, but like fleshly brains, we've never interacted with anything smarter than us. And I think what's going on with AI is people are trying to figure out how to use their innate, that's a person hardware to understand what AI is doing. And I think so far this is causing great confusion to smart and not well-informed people alike. Like Sam Harris is like, oh man, it's going to get super intelligent, and then the first thing it'll do is try and take over the world. Well, humans have like this super long built-in desires for growth and conquest, or at least a fear that other people will try and do that to them. That when we think like, oh man, if I were really smart, or if my enemy were really smart, he would try and conquer me, or I would try and conquer him. And so if this machine gets too smart, that's what it's going to do. But that's because humans have all of this evolutionary history that gives us these impulses and desires for conquest and reproduction and territory acquisition, etc. But artificial intelligence doesn't have any such desires, or at least not that we've dared to program it with. And so I think that a lot of what's going on is we're making AIs, especially ChatGPT, that are basically human text mimicry machines. And this is causing us to do all sorts of weird misfiring of attributing human motivations and abilities and constraints to it that is not true at all. But I mean, I think it's going to be really weird how to deal with all of this.
Well, part of the discussion we eternally have, and I say we need somebody like Sam and Yosef to answer, is I think Chazi thinks that within the next, 20, 30 years, we might have some sort of implant that communicates automatically in some way other than how we're doing, or that AI will have a type of intelligence which allows it to kind of be like a rabbi, or be a spiritual leader or a political leader. And that's the type of societal change that Chazi often brings this technological advance into, where I think we're nowhere near the technologies like that.
So Jacob, thank you for clarifying, because I was going to say I wanted to redirect a little. Aside from like the difference of how humans are different from AI, which was what you were sort of discussing, Sam, or like what the things we were trying to sort of map on, I'm relating to more what Jacob's talking about, where you could imagine even if in 30, 40 years, we just have 50% more time on our hands. Like, do we know what to do with that? And what does 40% more time on our hands mean to how we interact with each other? And my point being is that the religious institutions, specifically in Judaism, the religious code is based on a model of human, which has pretty much stayed the same. And my question is, when I suddenly have, I'm not even talking about Neuralink, but even if it's 100 years from now, I still think the conversation is relevant now. But are we moving down the line with just changing how humans think, how humans interact, and how humans are playing this game, even if it's, I have an AI that in my ear, right, which is not in my head, but it is seeing your micro expressions and then telling me what you're thinking, which then, like, do I think, should I give you the benefit of the doubt or no? If an AI is telling me not to give you the benefit of the doubt based on your interactions, that already has a religious implication, because I'm supposed to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Is that true when scientifically I'm being told that this guy's dangerous?
Yeah. I think that there are a couple things that AI can't do right now that are important. It has no such thing as comprehension. I'm not sure if we really quite know what comprehension is, but somehow we feel like I understand the words in my mind, or I understand the words that you say. And as far as I think it would be completely ludicrous to attribute anything like comprehension to ChatGPT. There's like, what's that philosopher Searle and the Chinese room thought experiment, where like
what is that?
Okay, so like this philosopher, I think John Searle, who I believe is still alive, I just think he's really old, in like the 80s or something, came up with this thought experiment where, imagine that you had a bunch of people in a room who had an instruction manual, that if they got given certain Chinese characters, they look up in the instruction manual and then they hold up Chinese characters as the response. But none of them in the room know or speak Chinese. They have an instruction manual, just let's say in English, that says, if you get this sequence of characters, hold up this sequence of characters. And they just look up in their rule book to do a bunch of if-then instructions. And we would agree that that room does not understand Chinese, even if they could somehow mimic Chinese comprehension. And ChatGPT is basically a giant Chinese room that if I get prompted with these things by the text response, hold up these things. It's a giant Chinese room thing, which is almost hilarious because it's kind of amazingly similar. It's not quite if-then statements, although in some sense it always collapses into if-then statements. But there's nothing like English comprehension going on inside ChatGPT. So I'm not quite sure how you know when something comprehends something or not. But I do think comprehension is a big deal, that artificial intelligence, it's not even like we're 5% of our way there or anything like that. It's just like, I don't think we're 0% of our way there. I don't think we have any idea what comprehension is, let alone how to make artificial comprehension. And I also think that we have almost no idea how to make artificial desire or artificial motivation or anything like that. Like all of these things that are machines that just input, response, input, response, input, response. It's not like ChatGPT, when the servers are less busy at 2 a.m. American time, are sitting there thinking to themselves, how can I take over the world now that I've got a little bit of extra computing bandwidth? You know, like they just solely respond. They don't do anything of their own accord or anything like that. And they have no autopoiesis. So there are all of these things that are, it's not even like we're on our way to building them. As far as I know, there's like no, movement on a lot of these things. So I think to get something that's truly crossing some sort of uncanny valley, you need to start getting those things before you should be worried about it as an agent that's going to like try and think and do something to you.
Well, in terms of utility, though, are we anywhere near, and I've heard from people who know better than me, but I don't know enough to evaluate, that it's all hype about like self-driving cars, that actually having a car that you can put in the middle of a parking lot and have it for itself decide how to get to the nearest street, as opposed to, like you said, the if-then statements of this is the map, and if you're in this lane and you're trying to go there, you do this, right? In order to have a truly self-driving car, it has to be more than that.
If-then statements don't seem to cut it, which is, I think, the main reason why we don't have self-driving cars. It's weird. Like my 2-year-old daughter can drive one of those Barbie Jeeps in the backyard after approximately 5 minutes of instruction. And, you know, she couldn't drive a car on the highway and stuff like that. But I was like looking at this, I'm like, this is unreal. There is no computer anywhere close with such a little amount of training that could do something as sophisticated as that. And like, I don't have no idea how a human can learn how to drive a Barbie Jeep car in the backyard at age 2. But there is something that a human has that enables that I just don't, I think we're it's not just we're categorically far away from that, we're multiple categories of abilities that just don't even exist artificially away from
so what's like that. What's the fear, right? That, like, you know, we stacked computing on top of computing and we reached ChatGPT. So why is not everyone just like as chill as you right now, Sam? They're like, yeah, this is nothing. It's all like we're forever away. There's nothing here. There's no there.
Well, I mean, I do have some worries about it, and I expressed it on a different live stream, like AI super porn and, you know, basically mechanized forms of preying on our weaknesses that hyper enable some of our vices to be exploited, and that causing people to get addicted to all sorts of things and zapping our energy and stuff like that. So I am genuinely worried about some of those things with the technology that either exists or seems to be existing in the next year or two. But I like, you know, the AI porn generator, it's not an agent. It doesn't have any desires. It is just this feedback production machine that, like, oh man, this porn video that I made yesterday got 100 million clicks. This one got 50 million clicks. Make more like this, experiment in that direction. Okay, it's even more addictive. It's even more addictive. It's even more addictive. But there's no comprehension. It doesn't know what porn is. It doesn't know why this train of, you know, videos is getting the attention. But that's still dangerous. But in terms of it being like an embodied evil thing that has its own autonomy, its own autopoiesis, and its own desires, like I just think we thoroughly underestimate how complex of creatures we are. And how much of what we do and why we do what we do is not intelligence. It's something else.
Do you think, so I'm trying to, I hear what you're saying, and I'm trying to think also, like, you know, years into the future, AI together with biology. Do you not think there are any implications there for gene editing, for longevity, for you know, super babies, super people? Like, even if is it so crazy to think that together with AI and its computing power and where we are with science today, that we're not making babies that all have like a 200 IQ and like they're all like fit like LeBron James?
That's interesting. So one of the things that AI is currently relatively good at and getting a lot better is designing pharmaceuticals, where you basically say, I want a molecule that can cleave onto the, you know, cell site protein cleavage place X. All right, design something that'll do that, you know, and then that's one of the uses. And there's been a couple drugs that have come out already that I can't remember the names of which ones in particular, that were basically AI designed. And it's basically playing the game of find a protein shape that can accomplish something. And then there's also something quite similar, which is, here's a genetic sequence. What protein shape does this make? Which is another sort of game that AI's gotten pretty good at. So it wouldn't be impossible for me to imagine it trying to come up with ways of making a better organism that are faster than natural selection, because it's basically using its simulation of reality as a form of hyperspeed artificial selection without needing to create an organism and see if it dies or not. But it needs a very constrained problem to solve to do that. And so if it was like, I don't know, try and design a heart that is less prone to heart failure, that's still probably a scale of problem that it couldn't do yet. But if it were to like try and design a red blood cell that can run a marathon faster, that actually might be the sort of thing that it could do. And then, okay, so then here's a protein that's never been in a human body before, and we splice that into someone's DNA. That is a little bit interesting. But again, is that artificial intelligence that's like the fear? Well, or is it the super people that are the fear and the societal competition to want my babies to be the super babies?
Well, that would be my point. That would still be AI giving us a tool that suddenly allows us to do, godly things, right? So even if it's at the level of, like IVF, a couple goes in and just says, just give me the best genes that me and my wife have to offer.
Mm-hmm.
Just the best of us. And why would you not do that? Again, like as a Jew, I think to myself, if I have the option in 10 years, 20 years from now, 30 years from now to, when I have my baby, I buy the clone package where all his body parts are ready for him. So like there's implications of him being more risky, right? Jump out of that plane, run that thing. It's all good. You got a spare part. And the biggest question I always bring up is longevity. If I'm living till 150, or if I'm living till like 150 in a body of a 40-year-old, so that has major changes, like how, any political leader is in power for who knows how long. And you have like, how does that really, are we now going to be children till we're 30? And only then, and I think that has large implications of how we socialize, how we interact. And maybe I'm wrong, but I would say, is that crazy to think that that's a reality in 30 years from now, 40 years from now?
Yeah, no, it's not crazy, or at least perhaps some minor versions of that. Maybe not the full-fledged kit and caboodle designed from scratch babies, but hey, do you want to add this gene, perhaps patented by, we'll just say Pfizer, pay Pfizer $100,000 and we'll go through the gene editing on either your embryo, your egg, or your sperm or whatever for trait XYZ for your baby. That's not impossible to imagine, even in like 5 or 10 years, I think. And then, and that's going to create a very strange world. Yeah.
So Jacob, what would you think of an example like that if you have the option to tweak your child's IQ, right? So
I don't think that's a real technological option within the next 5 years, because
I think that could be. I think specifically tweak your IQ, or hey, Pfizer patented gene sequence blah 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 has been shown in clinical trials to raise your kid's IQ on average of 20 points, something like that.
Sam, okay,
that is not far-fetched.
I have a friend who works on a particular genetic disease, and it's a real ethical question, because it's a disease that if you have the gene, you will get the disease.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And so there is the option of checking embryos after taking one cell out of an embryo and just checking if it has it.
Huntington's disease is that's a well-known one. Yeah.
That's
my friend with it died 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's the one my friend is working on.
Yeah, I have a friend family who has Huntington's. So yeah, that one's absolutely terrible, and that's actually relatively easy to check for by the nature of the genetic problem that it is.
Exactly, it's relatively easy to check for, And so this is part of the eternal discussion that Chazi and I are having. Chazi thinks that the halakhic process is not updating fast enough, which to some extent I agree, because I don't think that the Jewish community is truly united in listening to the rabbis and allowing rabbis to make the type of decisions that they should be able to do. But I don't think that there's anything technologically right now which motivates that. And I certainly don't think there's anything politically which should motivate a change in our religion. I think mipnei chatatenu galinu ma'artzenu. We live in exile because of our sin, and exactly as the Rebbe said, the way forward is for us to become more religious, to actually care about what Torah already teaches more, and to not to try to innovate something that's different.
Halfway between Jacob and Hezi, maybe. I think that one of the weird things about evolution, or one of the weird things about, it's sort of my polar bear in the sky thing, is we don't actually know what is best, right? Like, even if I were to say, hey, take me and my wife's DNA, make a kid that's authentically a combination of that is one of the possible things that could have arisen naturally, and just do the best of that. It's like, okay, well, what do you mean by best exactly? Do you mean most likely to graduate high school? Do you mean most likely to make it to the Olympics? Do you mean most likely to live past the age of 90? Do you mean least likely to get cancer? It's like, and some of those things will start to tug on each other, right? Like, being the best Olympic athlete probably means that it's a sacrifice on longevity, because you want youthful vitality, right? Which is often so those two things might be in direct tension. IQ might be in direct tension with risk of mental illness, and those sorts of things. And there are all these sorts of trade-offs, and we don't really know what's best. And that sort of, that's one of my things that makes me slightly less fearful of AI, is that solving the question of what's best is often not just a matter of intelligence. And that AI will have to be going through the same natural selection process we are. And I view that as almost something of an equalizer, of a reason not to fear it as much, because it'll have to be solving the same problem space that we are, often by the same means. And that intelligence will make some problems easier to solve, but it's not actually as many of them as we might think. And it's often not quite as much of the important ones as we think, because holiness or righteousness or something like that is relatively orthogonal, I think, in many ways to intelligence.
So Ben asks a really good question. Well, he actually makes an important statement. If you abort a fetus that shows signs that it will develop Down syndrome, you are already doing a Gattaca. And this is something that is a moral question that is live and real. And there are countries with 0 people who have Down syndrome, and they're proud of
Iceland. That. Yeah. I don't think you could find a single Downs patient, child, human in Iceland.
Yeah. And I think, so this is not a question of, it's not a technological question, because we already have that question, and we've had infanticide for thousands of years. And frankly, that's all I think of people who abort a child because it has Down syndrome. It's infanticide. It's just infanticide a little bit earlier.
Yeah, infanticide without birth.
Yeah.
And you don't have to hear them crying on the hill.
Exactly. And so for me, it's like, okay, our real questions are the ethical, religious questions. Technology has always been around. There's always been new technology. There was the printing press. The printing press was a huge revolutionary thing. But guess what? Actually, halacha, like, I don't think without the printing press, we would have had the Shulchan Aruch. And without the printing press and the Shulchan Aruch, Judaism would not be as monolithic, which is not very monolithic, but it's monolithic enough that we are a united community, which is really, really important. When somebody starts wearing the clothes of an 18th century Polish noble, that's them identifying with our tradition and who we are. And that's important.
First of all, that was my point being, so they wouldn't accept Moses, right? Because he doesn't look like what we are, right?
Can I go back to Moses?
Moses would wear a shtreimel.
Can I go back to Moses?
I got to run people. Jacob. Fun talking with y'all.
Thanks,
Sam. Later, Sam.
I think one of the interesting things is that some of the most intelligent people I've ever met, some of the most clever people I've ever met, are Jewish. I have a friend at work, and so on and so forth. Yes. But actually, what's also true is I think that it's true that Judaism, in interior to itself, has more genetic diseases than almost any other group. And I think that, IQ is always better. But I think that actually what happens is that things are self-limiting in this world order that we live in. And I think that's built into the system. I think that's part of creation.
This is the argument. Mankind. This is the argument I end up talking to for the past 20 years with anti-Semites on whatchamacallit, on the various internet forums. Is they say they start pointing to the Jewish prohibition of marrying outside of your religion, and I point out to them that it's actually, if you're looking for genetic advantage, that's not, the endogamy is not something I would recommend at all, right? And if it wasn't a part of the Torah, I would be totally against endogamous communities. And I have to take it on faith that this was a decision God made to require endogamy within Judaism in very restricted ways, which do cause all kinds of problems. And like my family tree, unfortunately, it doesn't look so much as a tree. There's a lot of tangles, right? And that's something that I honestly, I have to take on faith, because yes, if you're just from a materialist, if you're just going by the science and Darwinism, then yeah, endogamy makes no sense.
It does for about 4 generations.
It does what?
For about 4 generations.
Okay.
Because if you like plants, if you breed plants in, you can actually do some really clever things with it. And I think, that's part of the... But you say you're endogamous, but actually, obviously, this is a long, long time ago, back in many, many generations back, that, whenever you took over an area, you kept the women.
Right, of course.
So you are going outside the community for that level of interaction. But yeah, I think that it's the natural system. So when I see my I see 2 very, very bright people from the same discipline marrying each other, I worry, because I've seen enough of that happening that actually produces autistic children, mostly on the science side. And it's like autism is actually the result of too much brightness being bred into you. And so yeah, I think that like Sam said, what is best, what characteristic, because my family, I'm 5th generation, my son is 6th generation engineers. Now, for at least 3 generations, we've married nurses and medical people. And that seems to work quite well as keeping things moving. But you know, I think that it is interesting that, you know, am I going to? Therefore, do I want my son to go down to Pfizer with a request for the best engineer? Because that would be an interesting child. You'd have to give them Meccano and Lego at the age in their cots.
All right, let me touch on the whole integrating the Ethiopians, because there's a pretty direct analogy with the Orthodox Church, with the East Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox, right? Because we definitely split at Chalcedon. I think the best way to do it is for both of us to approach genuinely, say, here's where we split, here's why we split, and give our theological reasonings for it. Just to approach it within our traditions, go back to that time period and hammer it out again. Obviously, like, we're going to have to realize that we come from different traditions. Like, for instance, there's a point in Vespers where we say, like, one nature out of two, a co-essential divinity, consubstantial with the Father and incorruptible, something like that, which is completely Coptic. You never hear an East Orthodox person say that there's one nature out of two. But the East Orthodox also claim that Cyril, St. Cyril, who used that language, is within their tradition. So if they want to keep their claim that their theology is consistent with when we were one church, they're going to have to allow us who continue that theology of when we were unified to keep that theology. So, I mean, I don't agree with whatever Ethiopian Jews dressing up as 18th century Hasidus or whatever. But I think to resolve the whole tension between you guys, you're going to have to go and explain your, what's the text? The Shulchan Aruch? Something like that? Yeah.
Shulchan Aruch, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and that's, I kind of sort of agree with you. And again, the dress is a matter of identification, right? When you want to identify with a community, when you want to display your membership with that community, you dress like a member of that community. And that doesn't mean that you can't wear Chazi's shirt, but it does mean that you wear Chazi's yarmulke.
Yeah, but you can't exactly dress like two communities at once, you know?
Well, this is the funny thing. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. You're muted, Chazi.
I'm going to need to leave in a second, so I just wanted to say, give like an example. So Ethiopian Jews pray the silent pray like this. And that's because they're calling down for, you know, God to come down to them. And they were told, like, that's strange, don't do this. And they looked back at the majority of Jews that when they do the silent, excuse me, when they do the silent pray, they shuckle. And they're like, that's weird. You know, like, why am I being told that I can't do this?
I have no idea why they're being told they can't do that.
So maybe I don't know if this would be a point of disagreement or not. I'm not rushing to say that Judaism now needs to adopt the quote unquote, let's say, laxed version of Ethiopian Jews. However, let's say a rabbi is dealing with a Ethiopian, he should realize and be more sensitive to where the community, where he's coming from. And for example, that like in Ethiopia, all the person that would perform the circumcision was a woman or the elder of the tribe, because they believe that they get that down from Moses' mother, from Zipporah. Now, a rabbi should be able to look at that and say, okay, you don't need to do another circumcision now. But the Jewish community said, like, sorry, you need to do it again. And you had people, elders, saying, being told that, like, it's not good enough. And the question is, should it have been, that's not what we do anymore, but yes, that's good enough for us. And that, you know, those are big, like, on the Sabbath, we don't hold any coins. We don't have any money with us. However, the Ethiopians that come to synagogue, they bring with them, either based on biblical verses, they bring with them an offering to the synagogue, whether it's food, and sometimes they have money in their pocket. And people from the community were going to them and saying, like, look at this is crazy. Now, there too, the attitude would be calmly and respectfully explain to them, but realize that that would be a process, and realize that while this is not something that now everyone in the Jewish community is doing, we could create a safe space, so to speak, for allow them to experience that reality, because it's legitimate in a certain sense, because it came out of history and into our reality again. And
Kazi, I don't understand who you're arguing with. Who disagrees with you?
I believe you were disagreeing with me earlier. But
I was disagreeing with you about that stuff, but the fact that we should calmly explain to them why in Shulchan Aruch, yes, and possibly Bedi Eved, their circumcision is...
That's the difference.
No, it cannot be lechatchila, Chazi. It cannot be lechatchila.
It can.
No, it cannot. And this is one of the things where that's why we need a religious hierarchy, and we need rabbanim, and we need people
leadership.
Who make that. Yes, we need people who can make those types of decisions, and it's everything that modern Orthodoxy has been dismantling, which is precisely what is necessary in a situation like that, because somebody has to make that decision. Yes, no.
I think it's sad that there is a big group in Judaism that sees them as half Jews or partially Jews or Jewish, but I would never let my daughter marry one of them. For example, whatever. I've spoken too much, Jacob.
No, I think anybody who uses half Jew obviously doesn't believe in halacha. I think you end up with things like that precisely when people don't actually believe in the authority of rabbis to bind and loosen on earth as in heaven. If Rabbi Breitowitz says it's fine, it's fine. And if Rabbi Breitowitz says it's not fine, it's not fine. And it's precisely that lack of kibbul ol, that lack of accepting the yoke of heaven, that is the problem.
Just the tension is with Ethiopian Judaism is this not like Reform Judaism or Conservative Judaism that like branched off. This is saying I predate your whole conversation.
They also also branched off. They were an isolated community that unfortunately did not have access to. And honestly, I mean, it's the Jewish community is the Jewish community. And,
right, so we're saying just like the famous, and I'll already end at this point, just like the famous Talmud story, which is it doesn't matter that you have the word of God, so to speak, or like the voice of God is coming from the sky, or that you have an actual tradition that, guess what, we know.
Because community matters. Yes, Chazi.
Right. So my point is you have a treasure trove over here, which it's silly for you not to try to tap into just because
who said no. The rabbis can't tap into. You're trying to tap into it because of your political motivations.
How am I tapping into it? What am I doing?
What we talked about it. No, seriously, it's like you can talk to Rabbi Breitowitz. He's down the road from you, and you've talked to Rabbi Shirky, and you can talk to the poskim, And to the degree that they want to do that, fine. But for me, it's a question of kibul ol, whereas for you, it's a question of, no, these rabbis don't, I don't like the decisions that they make.
No, I think, you know, and different rabbis told the Ethiopian community different things. Some of them told them that their red line is the Shulchan Aruch. Some told them that their red line is the Talmud, as in that's where they could go further back from the Shulchan Aruch, and that's fine. And I'm combining two, like the AI and the Ethiopian Jews, two of these topics together, because I see you have a pocket of an early tradition, and you're looking into the future. And if you want to realize how you need to potentially change and adopt, you should be able to, you should look back at this potentially authentic version of yourself, see where you are now, and see how you move forward.
And Rav Ovadia Yosef wasn't doing that when he was paskening on the Ethiopians?
He did, and much of the Sephardic community still didn't accept his decree and made them do.
Right, and you're 100% right that not listening to Rav Ovadia Yosef is the problem. I 100% agree with you that people should have listened to Rav Ovadia when he made that psak din. But the problem is not that Rav Ovadia was making mistakes or not looking here or that. The problem was kibul ol, as it always is.
Right, but here is the reverse. He said they're legit, and the community is like, no.
How is that reverse? Yes, exactly. That's always the problem. The person who's machmir here more than the rabbis say will be mekel here more than the rabbis say, because it's about them as opposed to submission to legitimate rabbinic authority. And yes, there's a question, what is legitimate rabbinic authority? But Rav Ovadia Yosef wowed the entire religious world. There's nobody who dares to say Rav Ovadia did not have the shoulders to make a psak din. That's why I talk about putting pictures of your father up, and I talk about putting pictures of the Yenuka up, and I put pictures of the Rebbe up, because there is the main problem is not how the rabbis go about. The halachic process is beautiful, and frankly, I love it. And everything you've claimed is your criticisms of the halachic process. I don't even see anybody disagreeing with you.
I don't think we're disagreeing on that point. I think where we disagree is how quick the change should be and what are the boundaries of said change. However,
what do you think stops the rabbis from making more changes?
When I say political pressure, I don't mean I mean political pressure from their communities. Sometimes lack of knowledge. Sometimes just their own fear of sort of moving the needle. Exactly. And sometimes that's coming from it's ill-advised. It's coming from a good place. Like, I think some of them feel like they're not worthy to really change that or make those changes. But on that note, Jacob, thank you for a fantastic space and a fantastic conversation. And
it's a pleasure to meet you, Shazi.
It was a pleasure to meet you too, Guy. Chad, good luck with your Mo. And Andrew, do your thing.
Yeah, I'll talk to you later, Chazi. Yeah, I think Chazi was right when he said that part of the problem is that rabbis, and it's because they realize the community will not listen to them, right? There's only so Absolutely. Only so much capacity you have when people don't actually listen to you.
Yes, and I think it's interesting, isn't it, that the guy, the rabbi you were talking about, Yosef?
Ovadia Yosef, yeah.
Yeah.
His last name is Yosef, yes.
Okay, Rabbi Yosef, he had the shoulders. It's interesting that's a great way of describing it, to make a decision. But even he couldn't get the community to follow him.
Well, the community mostly did. No, that's so. Rav Ovadia Yosef mostly, but if he had, there were certain things. So, for example, he said that Chezi on Passover could eat corn, right. And that is a huge issue in Israel, and lots of people were like,
as in maize.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
So that's a huge. That's one of the things that he tried to enact. That actually, the funny thing is now more and more, even though this was something he said like 30, 40 years ago, and he passed away like 10 years ago, I think. It's becoming, it's actually kind of sort of happening.
These things happen. Generational effect.
And it takes a bit of wisdom. Like Rav Ovadia, it's not like I thought he was the wisest man in the world. I mean, while I do have a picture of him around here somewhere, and I do have one, his son's book that anthologizes his things. Like, I don't think he was like the Rebbe in his capacity. The Rebbe's capacity to see important things, I really believe, was guided by the Spirit in a way that was just beyond. Rav Ovadia Yosef was an incredibly smart person, and he demonstrated a lot more wisdom than a lot of people, and that's why he was who he was. And hopefully the Yenuka, he's at age 34, he's showing himself to be someone like Rav Ovadia Yosef. But for me, the issue is not that I think the Yenuka is not taking into consideration enough science or other things. I think he's taking into consideration as much science as he possibly can. I don't think he has some sort of like, no, I will not listen to scientists thing. But ultimately, he doesn't have, people don't listen to him. If he were to say something that people don't like, they would ignore him. And it happened even with the Rebbe inside Chabad. Go ahead.
Yeah, you were saying earlier about becoming a rabbi. And it's interesting about Raj and becoming guru, because that was, I think to him, it was a question he hadn't really asked before to himself. But it was important, because how do you become a teacher? How do you become a pastor? How do you become a leader in a community? And yes, there's a certain amount of knowledge, there's a certain amount of inheritance, but actually, if you don't have wisdom to lead the community well, and visibly and respect for the community itself as well, then you can't lead. You can't become the rabbi. You can't become the internal leader. And I think that's one of the interesting things about Paul, is that, you know, he's created a community around him, but it's because of who he is, because of the nature of of who he is, that this little community can exist.
Chad agrees.
Chad agrees, definitely. And I would like to say as well that we Christians also went through that very difficult phase, especially with getting Gentiles in. I've just been reading, my daily reading today in the Bible was Peter, and being offered a tablecloth full of slightly non-kosher food.
Slightly, yes, lizard. Slightly.
So non-kosher they don't even dare mention what they were, but they including reptiles. But the change, he had to go back to Jerusalem and explain it to the brethren, who then went, oh, okay, so that makes sense, and did accept it. And then you find out Paul going back 15 years later and having to go through the same argument and discussion, because people hadn't really accepted it, and there were enough people being awkward out in the boonies that you had to go back to headquarters and say, look, let's just sign this one off properly and get all the chief rabbis of the day, i.e. the disciples and the apostles, to say, yeah, we can accept Jewish people in, with a couple of considerations on that.
Well, I have to say, like, part of my discussion with Father Stephen DeYoung, and that's why I'm going to end this chat at the top of the hour, because we do have our Bible study later tonight, and it's quite likely Father Stephen will show up. So like I understand your point, although I have to say your interpretation of Acts is exactly what Father Stephen and I have been talking about.
Interesting.
His interpretation of Acts is very, very different from what we are used to, at least in the United States, certainly in Protestant circles. And I keep on telling him I expect him to be burnt at the stake as a Judaizer any minute now. And he tells me that what he says is not controversial within at least his church, which is surprising. I mean, he's writing the curriculum for Sunday schools in the Antiochian church, and he's writing books that are being widely disseminated within Eastern Orthodoxy, and he does lecture at Eastern Orthodox seminaries. So he's been very influential. But the description of Christianity he gives is qualitatively different, I would say, from what I've seen in terms of Western Christianity, in how it interacts with Judaism.
Before I forget, Jacob, Justinian. I know you're interested with him on him like outlawing the Shema and other stuff like that. I'm pretty sure Justinian was leaning into a whatever state religion or whatever. Because, I mean, you can see it with him trying to rejoin with the Church of Rome, right? He conquers everything over there, and he spends so much money that they cannot hold it for more than a decade. And he tries getting the Pope's help too, by whatever, having talks with him on Chalcedon, and he gets nowhere with that. And he even marries a Miaphysite to try and just like, join the whole church together. But that doesn't work, so he starts persecuting everyone. So,
I mean, Justinian only matters to me as long as Christians still think of him as a saint. And that's the question. Is he a saint or not? That's not a decision I can make. But if Christians believe Justinian to be a saint, that tells me that that's not a Christianity I feel comfortable saying is a continuation of Second Temple Judaism, Judaism as Jesus and possibly Paul. I mean, again, Father Stephen DeYoung has his very peculiar interpretation, which I would be more than happy for him to convince other Christians of, and it's possible that he will. I personally have not been convinced that Paul was preaching what, and I've been trying to squint very hard and see that, but I don't see Paul within Judaism being true. If it is, great. And even if it's not, if Christians believe in Paul within Judaism, I certainly prefer it to actual Paul.
Well, I've got no idea about Paul within Judaism, but I don't think Justinian's a saint. So,
yeah, I one of the very beginnings, as we first interacted, and you probably didn't interact with me, but I interacted with you, Jacob, a long time ago, was about Paul not being your favorite person, and and I had just literally read 8 to 10 inches of about Paul by my fellow Englishman N.T. Wright, and it was very interesting. And I know you've read some N.T. Wright.
I haven't actually read him. So N.T. Wright, he's New Perspectives in Paul, and Paul within Judaism takes that even further to the point where it's something. So yeah, I prefer New Perspectives of Paul to old perspectives of Paul. Yeah, 100%. And Paul within Judaism is even better. But ultimately, I think the old perspectives in Paul are the old perspectives in Paul because they're the historically accurate perspectives in Paul. I think Paul did hijack Christianity from Jesus and his family.
All right, with that, I gotta head out. So.
Shall we call it a day? Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, I think I'm going to end the broadcast here.
God bless you both.
You as well.
God bless.